Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Advika, and in this video we're still talking about vision, but particularly about the parallel processing in the visual cortex. So it is natural to assume that anyone who sees an object sees everything about it, whether the shape, the color, location, the movement, and etc. However, one part of your brain actually sees its shape, and another part of your brain sees the color, and another detects location, and another perceived movement. So consequently, after localized brain damage, is it possible to see certain aspects of an object but not others? And centuries ago, people found it difficult to imagine how someone could see an object without seeing what color is it. But and also even today, you might find it surprising to learn about people who see an object without seeing where it is, or see the object without seeing whether it is moving or is it not moving. So in this video, we will be reviewing about the ventral and dorsal path, yeah, as well as the detailed analysis of shapes, and then the last one is the motion perception. All right, let's begin to overviewing our primary visual cortex again. As you can see in this figure, the primary visual cortex, or the V1 area, they will send information to the secondary visual cortex, or area V2, yeah, which processes the information further and transmit it to additional area. And the connection in the visual cortex are reciprocal, actually. For example, V1 sends information to V2, and V2 returns information to V1, and so on. So from V2, the information then branches, out in several directions for specialized processing further. And then researchers also distinguish between the ventral stream and the dorsal stream. We will take a look at it closer after these slides, but we should remember that also the distinction between ventral and dorsal pathway is useful. We should not overstate it, yeah. Ordinarily, you will use both of the systems in coordination with each other. So let's take a look closer about the ventral and dorsal stream. So the ventral stream through the temporal cortex, yeah, it is the temporal cortex. It is the perception pathways, yeah, or the WATH pathways, because it is important for identifying and recognizing objects. And an observation of few patients with brain damage in this area, or the ventral stream area, it's one famous example is a woman known as DF. She was exposed to carbon monoxide, causing damage mainly to the ventral stream of her brain. That is the temporal cortex and its connection with the primary visual cortex. So because of this damage, she cannot name the objects she sees. She cannot recognize she cannot recognize faces. She then even cannot distinguish of a square from a rectangle. But when she was shown a slot in the wall, she could not say whether it was horizontal or it is vertical, right? Because she cannot like distinguish shapes. And nevertheless, when she was asked to put an envelope through the slot, she aimed it correctly at once. When asked to guess the size of an object she sees, she performed at a chance level. However, when she asked to pick up the object, she reaches out correctly. She adjusts her thumb and finger before touching the object. So in short, people with temporal lobe damage and causing damage in the ventral stream, they can use vision to guide their action, but they cannot identify what the objects are. Interesting. And then the opposite side is the dorsal stream, is through the parietal lobe, yeah. as you can see in this figure. And it is the the action pathway or the how pathway, because the dorsal stream is useful for visually guided movement. So as you may guess, people with damage to the dorsal stream or their parietal cortex have somewhat the opposite problem with the damage in the ventral stream. So they can see objects, but they do not integrate their vision well with their arms and legs movement. So they can read, they recognize face, and they can describe objects in detail, but they cannot accurately reach out to grasp an object. So for example, while walking, they can describe what they see, but they tend to bump into objects. Yeah, they oblivious to their location as well. So although they can describe from memory what their furniture looks like in their house, they cannot remember where it is located in their house. So often they seem uncertain where certain parts of their body are as well. So it means that dorsal stream damage is specifically a problem of using vision to control their body movement, moreover their arm and legs movement. And continuing our discussion, in the previous module, we've encountered simple and complex cells in our primary visual cortex, right? So as visual information goes from the simple cells to complex cells and then to other brain areas, the receptive field become larger and more specialized. And then in the secondary visual cortex or the area V2, the location is just the location of V2 is just anterior to V1 in the occipital cortex. Most cells are similar to V1 cells in responding to line, edge, or sine wave grating, except that V1 receptive field are more elongated. And also some V2 cells responds best to corner, texture, or complex complex shapes. And then area V2 and V3 have some cells highly responsible to color, and other cells also highly responsive to the disparity between what the left and right eye see. It's a critical information for stereoscopic depth perception. In later part of the visual system, receptive properties become still more complex actually, and it's still understudied. All right, so we will learn specifically about the interior temporal cortex that is related to detailed analysis of shape. So cells in the inferior temporal cortex learn to recognize meaningful objects. A cell that responds to the sight of some object will initially respond mainly when it sees that object from the same angle, but after a bit of experience, it learns to respond almost equally to that object from other viewpoints. It is responding to the object regardless of major changes in the pattern that reaches the retina actually. So similarly, in this figure, researchers investigate a monkey's inferior temporal cortex that responded strongly to the original profile, responded about the same way to its mirror image or contrast reversal. Yeah. But not to a figure ground reversal. In terms of the actual pattern of light and dark, the ground reversal is much like the original, but most people, and evidently monkeys also, sees it as a white object on a black background rather than a face. As we might expect, damage to the ventral pathways of the cortex leads to specialized deficits. It's called as visual agnosia, meaning visual lack of knowledge. Yeah, so it is an inability to recognize objects despite otherwise satisfactory vision. So it is a common result for damage in the temporal cortex that someone might be able to point to visual object and slowly describe them, but they fail to recognize what they are. Okay, so and continuing that, within the brain area specialized for perceiving shape, are there further specialization for particular types of shape then? That's the question. So according to fMRI studies, as people viewed picture, most objects do not activate one brain area more than another. That is, the brain does not have a specialized areas for seeing flower, fish, birds, clothes, food, or rocks, right? However, three types of objects do produce specific responses. So one part is the parahippocampal cortex. It's the location is next to the hippocampus. They respond strongly to pictures of places and not so strongly to anything else. And then also the part of the fusiform gyrus of the inferior temporal cortex. So especially in the right hemisphere, as you can see in this figure, the location of fusiform gyrus is here. It responds more strongly to faces than anything else. And then also an area close to this face area or the fusiform gyrus area, it responds more strongly to bodies than to anything else. So the brain is actually amazingly adept at detecting biological motion. It's the kinds of motion produced by people or animal. All right, so more detail into recognizing faces. So face recognition is actually is an important skill for humans. So for example, like for civilization to succeed, we have to know whom to trust and whom to distrust, right? And that distinction requires us to recognize people that we haven't seen in months or years. And human newborns also like come into the world predisposed to pay more attention to face than other stationary displays, as you can see in this figure. Yeah, they more pay attention to face. That tendency then supports the idea of a built-in face recognition model in our brain. However, the infant's concept of face is not like an adult actually. So in this other figure, we can see that experimenters recorded infants a time of gazing at one face or the other, as shown in the bottom figure. The newborns showed a strong preference for a right side up face over an upside down face, regardless of whether the face was realistic, the left pair, or distorted is in the center pair. So when confronted with two side right up faces, the right pair, they showed no significant preference between a realistic one and a distorted one. Evidently, a newborn concept of face requires the eyes to be on top, but the face does not have to be realistic. So based on many research, the occipital face area responds strongly to part of face such as the eyes and the mouth as well. And the fusiform gyrus, they respond strongly to a face viewed from any angle, as well as line drawings and anything else that looks like a face, such as like smiley, smiley face. And people with several problem in fusiform gyrus say to have the impairment called prosopagnosia, yeah, meaning impaired ability to recognize face, yeah. Again, it's because of the damage in our fusiform gyrus or from a failure of that gyrus to develop fully. And people with prosopagnosia, they can read, so the visual acuity is not the problem actually. So the problem is not vision, but something that relates specifically to faces. So when people with prosopagnosia look at face, they can describe each element of a face, such as their brown eyes, their big ears, or small nose, and so forth, but they do not recognize the face as a whole. In contrast, if you can recognize face more easily than average, it may be that you have richer than average connection between your fusiform gyrus and occipital cortex. But the question is, did we really evolve a brain module devoted to faces? Or does the fusiform gyrus serve for all types of detailed visual recognition for which face are just a good example? So another experiment indicate that children with an intense interest in Pokemon cards, they show strong response in the fusiform gyres when they look at Pokemon characters. And then also another experiment, they investigate that chess experts also show a response there in the fusiform gyres when they look at a chessboard. So as people learn to read, yeah, the fusiform gyres also becomes more responsive to words and less responsive to faces in their left hemisphere. So based on those research, evidently the fusiform gyrus participates in many types of detailed visual recognition, not only face. However, even in people with extreme level of expertise, many cells in their fusiform gyrus respond more vigorously to faces than to anything else. All right, let's continue to motion perception. How then we perceive motion? So moving objects often merit immediate attention, right? So actually our brain is set up to make motion perception calculation quickly and efficiently. And two areas especially important for motion perception are the MT or the middle temporal cortex. Yeah. It's also known as area V5 here. Yeah. And it is an adjacent region. The adjacent region of V5 is the area of MST or medial superior temporal cortex. These areas actually receive input mostly from the magnocellular path, yeah, which detect overall patterns, including movement or large areas of the visual field. And given that the magnocellular part is color insensitive, yeah, they're color insensitive, the middle temporal cortex also color insensitive. But most cells in the area MT respond selectively when something moves at a particular speed in a particular direction. So MT cells detect acceleration or deceleration as well as the absolute speed. And they respond to motion in all three dimensions. And interestingly, area MT also respond to photographs that imply movement, such as photo of people running. And people who had electrical stimulation of area MT, while they were undergoing exploratory studies to find the cause of their severe epilepsy, they got the electrical stimulation in the area MT. The researchers report they're seeing vibration or other hallucinated movement during the stimulation. They also become temporarily impaired at seeing something that really is moving. So in short, MT or the middle temporal activity is apparently central to the experience of seeing motion. And looking closer to motion perception, brain area is the middle or the middle temporal cortex. So cells in the dorsal part of area MST or the medial superior temporal cortex, yeah, they respond best to more complex stimuli such as the expansion, the contraction or rotation of a large visual scene as illustrated in this figure. Yeah, and that kind of experience occurs when you move forward or backward or tilt your head. So when you move your head or eyes from the left to right, everything in your visual field move across your retina as if the world itself have moved to right to the left. So you may try this too. So yet the world seems stationary because nothing moves relative to anything else. And neuron in area MT and the frontal part of MST then respond briskly if something moves relative to the background. But they show little response if the object and the background both move in the same direction and speed. So in short, MT and MST neurons enable you to distinguish between the result of eye movement or the result of the object movement. So given that areas MT and MST is respond strongly to moving objects and only to moving objects, what would happen after damage to these areas? So the result is the motion blindness. So it is like being able to see object but unable to see whether they're moving, or if so, which direction and how fast are the movement. So people with motion blindness are better at reaching for a moving object than at describing its motion. But in all aspects of dealing with visual motion, they are far behind other people. So motion blindness is the absence of other dysfunction, is a rare condition actually. And one best example of this case is LM, a patient called LM. She reported that she felt uncomfortable when people walk around because they were like suddenly here or there or suddenly there, but she cannot like see them moving at all. And people would seem to appear or disappear suddenly. So even when she was trying to keep track of them, someone who was walking would appear to her as restless, but she would not know which direction the person was going. Yeah, so you can imagine that is really like a stressful condition for a patient with motion blindness. Now you may wonder what it would be like to be motion blind, so you can try this demonstration. Maybe you can look at your mirror, yourself in a mirror, and focus on your left eye. Then shift your focus to your right eyes. Okay. So did you see your eyes move? No, I bet no, you did not. So why didn't you see your eyes move? Your first impulse may be to say that the movement was too small or too fast, but actually it is wrong. You do not see your eyes move because area empty and part of the parietal cortex decrease their activity during voluntary eye movement, and known as saccades. Yeah. So activity does not decrease while your eyes are following or moving object. So the brain areas that monitor saccades tell area empty and the parietal cortex that we're about to move the eye muscle, so take a rest for the next split second. That's what they say, if you can imagine, like neural, and then like neural activity and blood flow in empty and part of the parietal cortex begin to decrease 75 milliseconds before the eye movement and remain suppressed during the movement. So in short, during a voluntary eye movement, you become motion blind, but just for a split second. And perhaps now you understand a little bit better what people with motion blindness experience all the time. All right, that's all for topic discussion in this video. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you again in the next module. Bye and take care.